So the last thing that Bungie needs right now is a controversy. Marathon being a game that they're highly dependent on for it to be their next big hit, combined with the fact that the general reception surrounding it hasn't been entirely positive, makes for an environment where they need as much positive press as possible. And so when you've got a controversy like plagiarism plaguing the whole game, that only spells further doom for a title that already kind of looks a bit like it might be down on arrival in terms of the reputation with the community. You can see right here, just from this gameplay overview trailer, that a lot of people are not liking the direction of turning Marathon into an extraction shooter. It doesn't appeal to Bungie fans. It feels like it's kind of going for like the least common denominator rather than kind of playing to their strengths. And beyond that, statistics show that the game is having trouble holding players. So for example, when the closed alpha test went live, you can see right here that there was a decent peak. And normally you want to see that peak kind of stabilize and show a certain level of retention that this graph right here doesn't show. You can see that the player base diminished very quickly as interest was lost very quickly. And same thing goes for Twitch viewership. You can see right here peaks that, eventually dipped into some pretty low valleys, highlighting a lack of retention from both players and audiences alike. Suffice to say that Marathon is facing an uphill battle, and it's already got not a particularly great reputation, but now that reputation has utterly tanked after revelations have come out that they plagiarized much of not only certain assets, but the visual language of the game was ripped off directly from this artist who was never credited, who was never contacted. And this artist is obviously really pissed off that their work was used in this way without permission. And so they took to Twitter to essentially not only do comparisons of their assets versus what Bungie output, but to kind of call them out for this kind of practice. And the thing is, this is nothing new for Bungie. Bungie has been known to plagiarize quite a bit in the past, and for it to happen again with Marathon, but to arguably an even more egregious degree, it's just something that doesn't bode well for the game. So here's what this artist had to say with the following post. The Marathon Alpha released recently, and its environments are covered with assets lifted from poster designs I made in 2017. And from my understanding, the development of Marathon began in 2018. And so it is highly likely that, yes, assets were directly lifted from this artist's work. And it's not just a similarity in style, it is just like exactly the same assets that were lifted. And that is highlighted in some of the screenshots that the artist posted. There are literally exact fonts and words and exact same, literally one-for-one copies of the original asset. This is the original asset right here. You can see right here, Aleph Dark Space Haulage Logistics. That exact graphic was copied and pasted into the game proper. It's not even changing the homework. They didn't even change the homework is the wild part, They just copied somebody else's work directly. The audacity is actually kind of insane for them to think that this would never get discovered and that they wouldn't get in trouble for it. Right here we have some more Bungie assets that they've inputted in Marathon, all of which can be seen directly ripped from the artist. You can see right here, this artist put together this graphic highlighting how these assets are exactly the same as what's featured in the game with little to no change. I mean, so blatant is this plagiarism that this logo right here is the logo of the artist. It is the logo that they use to represent themselves. It is not even a question that there was a ripoff here. It is as blatant as plagiarism can get. Last but not least, right here we have similarities between what is shown in the Marathon press kit and the Marathon homepage versus what the artist put together on the left here. You can see once more that the homework has been changed little to not at all. And I mean, the design language is so one-to-one translated that for the artist to not be credited or contacted or compensated is pretty freaking egregious. The artist continued to call out Bungie with the following posts. Bungie is of course not obligated to hire me when making a game that draws overwhelmingly from the same design language I've refined for the last decade, but clearly my work was good enough to pillage for ideas and plaster all over their game without pay or attribution. I don't have the resources nor the energy to spare to pursue this legally, but I have lost count of the number of times a major company has deemed it easier to pay a designer to imitate or steal my work than to write me an email. In 10 years, I've never made a consistent income from this work, and I'm tired of designers from huge companies mood boarding, and parasiting my designs while I struggle to make a living. And look, that's not to say that this artist invented this whole style of minimalist graphics, but it is very clear that on top of specific assets being used, there's just some elements of this artist's style of minimalist graphics that Bungie did rip off that lends itself to people questioning how much of the art style of Marathon was a result of inspiration from this artist. And in the case of certain assets that are one-to-one copies, how much stuff was lifted from artists directly. It's worth noting that this post right here from this artist has garnered tons of views and likes. So as of the recording of this video, it's got almost 8 million views and over 55,000 likes. Suffice to say that this story has spread like wildfire. And what makes it even more apparent that this is blatant plagiarism, Bungie artists and developers were following this artist on Twitter. So this artist noted how Joseph Cross, who, as you can see right here, is the franchise art director for Marathon at Bungie, this individual has been following this artist for a few years, and a few others from Bungie have also followed this artist, never had any communication, never thought to reach out, never thought to, remotely try to work together with this artist. Now, the Marathon development team have responded officially on the following Twitter page, the Marathon Dev Team Twitter account. They posted the following shortly after they were made aware that art assets and just the art style that was established by the original artist was completely stolen. They said, quote, "We immediately investigated a concern regarding unauthorized use of artist decals in Marathon and confirmed that a former Bungie artist included these in a texture sheet that was ultimately used in-game. This issue was unknown by our existing art team, and we're still reviewing how this oversight occurred. We take matters like this very seriously. We have reached out to the artist to discuss this issue and are committed to do right by the artist. As a matter of policy, we do not use the work of artists without their permission. That might be as a matter of policy, but seemingly you keep hiring people who feel the liberty to take other people's work. As again, this is not the first time that Bungie has been caught plagiarizing the artwork of others without their permission, without restitution, without compensation. The Marathon Dev Team account continues here. To prevent similar issues in the future, we're conducting a thorough review of our in-game assets, specifically those done by the former Bungie artists, and implementing stricter checks to document all artist contributions. We value the creativity and dedication of all artists who contribute to our games, and we're committed to doing right by them. Thank you for bringing this to our attention." But the thing is, the artist didn't contribute to your game. You stole their work and then forced them to contribute to your game by stealing from them without their permission. So this is just unconsensual contributions, and it's just messed up that this situation is a thing at all. And they keep talking about how it's a former Bungie artist who decided to kind of steal this art style and the design language and literally copy graphics one-to-one. But when you consider that you've got current employees at Bungie who are working on Marathon, like franchise art director for Marathon, Joseph Cross, who's followed the artist for many years, it just creates this very suspicious looking scenario where a lot of people don't believe the current developers or some of the current artists had nothing to do with letting this slide, with hoping that they could just keep getting away with it. I don't know exactly who's responsible for this, but at the end of the day, it doesn't change the fact that this is a very blatant case of plagiarism, so obvious and so egregious that it just makes it hard for people to trust Bungie, especially when this keeps happening again and again and again. So, for example, back in September of 2024, it was discovered that artist Tofu Bunny had artwork that they made stolen. So they made the Nerf Ace of Spades gun design here that was directly lifted and then implemented into the game. Then we've got this case from June of 2023. Julian Failona, the artist of this specific work right here, posted, "I just realized Bungie took inspiration from my piece for this week's cutscene. Certainly took me by surprise when I watched the cutscene. The Destiny 2 team had to come out, apologize, and say we've discovered that an external vendor that helped to create this cutscene mistakenly used this art as a reference, assuming it was official Bungie art. We have reached out to the artists to apologize for the mix-up and to credit and compensate them for their awesome work." Here we have one more from September of 2021. "I'm not one to make a whole stinker, and it's most likely that this was a mere accident, but did Bungie use Relay 314's Jivu Aerith fan art for their Destiny, the Witch Queen Detective wall trailer? And there are some comparisons right here that may hint at that possibility. Now, this specific situation was eventually resolved with Bungie having reached out to the artist and saying that there was a mix-up when creating this post and Relay Through Unforced art was accidentally used. We've reached out to them and got permission to use their work and are now crediting them for this awesome community depiction of Xivu Arath. And the artist was gracious and very grateful that they were reached out to and that this was handled, at the very least, towards the end, well, in the sense that all is well that ends well. But it remains a fact that there's a consistent pattern of Bungie taking other people's artwork without their permission and having to reach out to them after the fact, after there's a discovery that somebody's artwork was lifted without consent. And that is just not the ethical approach when it comes to implementing artwork into your game. And, this being a game that, despite the lack of enthusiasm surrounding what it's doing with its gameplay, at the very least, people praise the fact that its art style does look kind of unique and interesting. It's got an interesting and unique vibe. Turns out that vibe wasn't so unique because what Bungie did was base that visual language off of somebody else's work. And so now that aspect of originality in terms of the aesthetic, that's something not worth complimenting anymore because that's been plagiarized and lifted from an artist whose work got stolen. And so this is just the worst case scenario for a live service where not only is there a general lack of interest or just apprehension surrounding its direction and it being just, another extraction shooter, but one that doesn't really stand out from the peak extraction shooters, from the kind of the norm extraction shooters that exist right now that people gravitate towards. Now you've got this controversy that highlights that when you look at the game, Marathon, and you appreciate its visuals, so much of that comes from the artist whose work got stolen. So much of that visual language is not truly original. So now the whole game just stinks. The whole game has this cloud looming over it. Now, the one positive development to all of this is that this artist has kind of come into the limelight and has been receiving a level of support that they were not anticipating. And from all this artist has essentially kind of gained a level of following and a level of support that they otherwise would not have seen. So, for example, right here we have a post from the artist following the support that they have been receiving. I believe there's a female artist. She tweeted the following: completely overwhelmed by the response to this. Thank you so much for the support, and especially to those who have donated. It helps enormously. So, if you have a buck to spare, maybe donate to this artist if you're someone who has been enjoying Marathon but didn't realize that a lot of the, visual aesthetics have been plagiarized. Maybe it's worth throwing a buck or two to the artist's way so that they're able to continue to do art. Or, have the war chest to be able to maybe take this up legally. This is something that Bungie should be able to be sued for, and it's a pretty open and shut case. And, I think more game companies deserve to face consequences for stuff like this that happens far too often. And look, I'm not saying all of Bungie contributed to this case of plagiarism. It might have been a handful of artists who kind of decided to essentially get lazy and screw over the entire company by doing so and by kind of sneaking in this plagiarism in a way that I'm sure a lot of developers and a lot of folks within Bungie had no idea about and did not realize. But for the artists who did contribute to this, it's a shame that they partook in this action that will be a huge detriment to the great efforts that developers who were not responsible for this put into this game, and it puts the entire project in jeopardy. But at the same time, Bungie needs to hire people who are not like this, who do not partake in this kind of plagiarism. They need to have the measures in place to be able to kind of detect stuff like this. I know it's easier said than done, but it doesn't change the fact that this has happened enough times. It's not a unique situation. This is not like a one-time thing. When this keeps happening over and over again, there comes a point where it just becomes less and less forgivable. Again, a certain level of audacity from the folks responsible for this within Bungie, the artists who decided to really get that lazy. Nothing wrong with being inspired by somebody else's art style and visual language, as long as you include them in the process and ask them for permission to use what is their artistry. Or at the very least, that's one man's take on this whole situation. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on this plagiarism situation, which again is pretty blatantly plagiarism. How much of an impact do you think this will have on Marathon, on the community's kind of disposition towards Bungie and Marathon, and how much impact do you think this will have on the game's ability to be successful? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yong Yao.